Dan Pearce, what is your favourite game?
My favourite game is Klonoa 2. I guess I first sort of got into playing games by playing basically just Pokemon on my Game Boy Color. My parents wouldn't let me have like a, in quotations, a real games console. I really wanted a PlayStation 1. They wouldn't let me have it because they thought I would get obsessed with it and it would like take over my life.
But what was the reason why you wanted a PlayStation 1 in the first place?
Just because all my friends had one. It just seemed cool. I wanted to play Spyro.
Who didn't?
Exactly. Well, it's just like Spyro had such lovely aesthetics and like everything. Like we had a PC, but like the games we had in that were like Total Annihilation and kind of more grown up stuff. And playing Spyro, just like when you pick up the gems, it sounds so lovely and everything about kind of. I'm not sure what it is. I think it was sort of the aesthetic limitations of the PS1 led to some really interesting artwork, and that really, really appealed to me. And I wanted to sort of explore the worlds in PS1s much more than I did on PC, which always felt a bit kind of finicky and odd. But yeah, so my parents didn't want me to have a PlayStation, but I kept asking them over and over and over again. And then, one Christmas, I open up a box, and it's not a PlayStation 1, it's a PlayStation 2. Right when it was like brand new. Which blew my mind. My brother cried. It was a very emotional experience.
Hey, I cried when I got my PS2, so hey, we're there.
I didn't. I was like, what a loser. Imagine crying over video games.
What?
And then, well, no, because we're going to find out later that just how much of a hypocrite I am. But yeah, so basically, we set it up. We started playing it. My brother's a bit older than me, so he got to play it first, and then I got to play it afterwards. And his go lasted for like an hour, and then I sat down and started playing it, and I just didn't stop for the whole day. Like, I didn't want to do anything else. I just wanted to sit and play video games.
What were those kind of first PS2 experiences? Like, what were those first games?
So there was Gran Turismo 3, which was, I think, more for my mum, because she quite likes driving games. And I never really saw the appeal in it because it was very grown up and realistic and stuff. And then the two games which I really got into were Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, which I think left a bigger imprint on me than I realized at the time. And the other one, which I think I probably spent the most time with, was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, just because it was like. For a movie tie-in, it was pretty nice. It looked very good for the time. It's a gorgeous looking game, really good art style. And you could free roam around Hogwarts pretty much on a broomstick, and that was like a really liberating experience for me. So those were sort of like my three main starter games. I didn't really get into any like really good games for quite a while. I'm not really sure why that was. I kept having like the string of average games, but I still found them really interesting. But importantly, the PS2 came with, or at least when I got the PS2, it came with like a demo disc.
That's right.
With all this stuff, and it had like like a trailer of Devil May Cry, which looked like the coolest thing ever because like Dante gets stabbed with the sword, and like a woman throws a motorbike at him, and he holds it in midair with pistol fire. Like, it's ridiculous, and I just look so cool. And there was just all this stuff on there. Some bits more interesting than others, and some bit left more of an impression than others. But there was a demo on there for Klonoa 2, which was like that. Because I had sort of skipped that PS1 generation, this was like my first like platformer. Klonoa, if people aren't aware, it's sort of, I don't know why, but I always sort of cringe at this term, but I'm going to use it. It's a 2.5D platformer where you move your character, Klonoa, left and right, but the levels are 3D and they kind of wind around in these paths and stuff.
Let's skip that for later on.
Okay.
We'll come to Klonoa in a while, but like going going slightly back, I can easily remember the demo disc coming with the PS2 because like well maybe yours was different because like the kind of stuff you're experiencing, the kind of stuff you're talking about even was 2001ish. So I got mine in early 2001, but it was 2 months after launch. So my demo disc was more Metal Gear Solid 2 SSX. Or well, it had the intro for the demo had like this kind of orchestra score, and it had footage of all the games coming up for PS2. I don't know if Devil May Cry was announced at that time, but like it had Metal Gear Solid 2, SSX, all the launch games. I think maybe Final Fantasy X, and I definitely recall there. I definitely recall Zone of the Enders 1 being in there as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Because so the ones that I remember were Soul Reaver 2 Legacy of Kain,
Hmm.
Devil May Cry, Jack and Daxter had a trailer on there.
Mm.
Obviously Klonoa 2 was on there. I'm not sure what else. I know you could code with it, which was bizarre. I never really got into it, but like they had like this very basic coding language that you can mess around with, and I messed with their snake code to make the snake really, really fast. And then was like, this is too complicated for me, I'm never gonna code ever. Um Again, very much just I have no conviction with that stuff. But yeah, so I'm not sure sort of where that would date it. I was about I think it was 7 or 8 years old when this happened, so that would have been 13 years ago. So yeah, it would have been like around that 2002 sort of Christmas.
Like further down the line, then, like what kind of shaped you into being the games person that you are now?
So there are a few things. I'd say everything sort of started happening at once when I was around 10 years old. When I was 10, that was when I started encountering like the greats, just sort of completely by accident. Up until that point, my favorite game had been, I think, James Bond Nightfire, which is an amazing game.
It is a good shooter, yeah.
It doesn't get enough love. Everyone
It
goes on
doesn't.
about GoldenEye, but it's really good. But yeah, so it mainly been that and Jak 2 Renegade, which I adore Jak 2 Renegade. I'd say that was the first game that I properly fell in love with. But I would say all of that sort of started happening when I was around 10. I was playing Jak 2. That's when I started like trying to just design my own games at school. I lied to my friends and said that I'd won a competition with EA and they were going to make a video game that I was designing. And during our break times for about 3 months, we would just sit there and like basically write design documents for this like imaginary fictional game that EA was going to make for us. And hilariously, about 6 years later, that thing that I made up about winning a competition with EA and then making my game almost exactly happened. Which I then had to. I met up with my friends who I lied to at the time, and they're like, "Ah, so what are you up to?" And I was like, "Well, you know that thing I lied about? Sort of that." But yeah, and basically, yeah. So I'd say that the start of it was when I was around 10, playing Jak 2 Renegade, trying to rip that off, getting sort of seeing murmurs about the Nintendo DS, and really falling for that hard as just seeming really, really interesting. And I was obsessed with the DS. I couldn't stop looking at like videos of it. I'd get magazines to read up on it. Some of that was sort of came from spite. There was a kid at school who I was really jealous of, who had a PSP that his dad brought in from Japan like 6 months before it came out. And because he had a PSP and I didn't, I decided that the PSP was awful and that the DS was the best.
Fanboy.
Exactly. So, you have no idea. So I became very into the DS, started reading official Nintendo magazine, went on their forums, just absorbed anything to do with Nintendo from that point on. And I was pretty much a Nintendo fanboy, probably like 4 years. I'd say from about the age of like 10 to 14, I wouldn't have anything else. Which sort of meant that I was right there when the Wii was launching, and I was really excited about that. And that was I think that really helped me as a designer, just all the buzz and the lead up to the Wii. just really inspired me. It really brought out the designer in me and made me think critically about like, okay, how would I use this new hardware that no one's really had a chance to play with yet? And it kind of forced me into a position where I had to think about design in a completely independent way without using that many comfortable reference points. Um, so yeah, like to answer your earlier question, that was when I sort of I'd say became a designer was sort of the age of 10 to 14 when I really got into Nintendo stuff and really started discovering the great games like Metal Gear Solid 2 and Jak 2 and like Mario 64, the DS version.
Yeah, industry side of things. Like, how did you jump on board, basically?
So I'd been trying to design games here and there for quite a while. I would sit in class, I'd get all my work done as quick as I can, or as quick as I could, and then I had this really big folder just filled with sheets of A4 paper where I would draw like characters and ideas for set pieces in games and all this stuff, and like control maps, like just loads of stuff. I've still got them. It's literally like if you were to stack all the like folders full of stuff that I made, it would be about like 1.5 feet worth of stuff that I'd just drawn in class. I used RPG Maker a lot and sort of played around with stuff there. But I'd say that the big turning point was winning BAFTA's Young Game Designers Award when I was 16, which was something that I'd found about from going to Eurogamer in 2010. I need to sort of like set this up a little bit. At the time, I was very, very excited for the game Brink from Splash Damage. And I'd been watching like every trailer I could for it. It looked really, really cool. And as a result, I just sort of like knew the faces of the team who were working on it. Like I just sort of like they were familiar to me. So when I went to Eurogamer and I saw the Splash Damage team sort of walking around, I knew who they were. I knew how to talk to them. I knew the sort of conversations I should be having with them. So I sort of, chatted to them a bit at the Brink stand. But importantly, in the careers section, the writer/designer at Splash Damage, Ed Stern, lovely, lovely man.
And someone who's been on the show before.
Yes. I'm not sure if he even remembers this. He was doing some stuff. He was representing BAFTA Young Game Designers to try and convince teenagers like myself, sort of 11 to 16-year-olds, why they should enter this competition with BAFTA and submit a game pitch. And because I recognized him, I saw him, and I was with a friend of mine, and I was like, should I go over and talk to him? I really don't want to just because it feels like it would be awkward, but like, should I do it? And my friend was like, well, you'll probably regret it more if you don't go and talk to him. And he was very right, because talking to Ed Stern was a huge deal for me. We chatted for like half an hour just about video games and all that stuff, and it really motivated me to enter BAFTA Young Game Designers competition. I submitted a game pitch for like a little platformer called, it was like a puzzle platformer called Hamster Accidental World Domination. It was sort of artistically, it looked a bit like the DS game Henry Hatsworth, which is an amazing game. If you haven't played it, you should. It's fantastic. And it won. I sent in like a few sheets basically saying like, here's how the mechanics work, here's how the story would work. It was sort of like a satire of standard platformer story tropes, and BAFTA liked it, and I won. I got to wear a suit. I went to a big fancy event. I met Hit Girl from Kick-Ass. It was a weird time. And from that, I suddenly had so many business cards and so many contacts and so many doors were suddenly open for me. And I could basically speak to anyone in the industry I want and be like, hi, can I have a few minutes of your time? I won BAFTA's Young Game Designers Award. And then they would give me that time. So I'd say that's when my career really, really started, was sort of getting the guts to talk to Ed Stern at Eurogamer, and then that leading me to win BAFTA Young Game Designers competition.
Let's get into your favourite game, Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil, as the subtitle was. So, oh, like you'd obviously gotten in with the PS2. You hadn't played anything on the PS1. So, like, had you played the first game beforehand, or on because PS2 was a backwards console or BC console, or did you play it later down the line after two came out?
I play it later down the line. Weirdly, I guess I don't know why this is, but I didn't play the original Klonoa, which is Klonoa Daughter Phantom Isle. I didn't play that until I guess about 2 years ago. Simply because it hadn't occurred to me that it existed. Weirdly, like
Even,
it was always just like Klonoa 2 was the game of my childhood, and I sort of pictured it as a standalone thing, even though it had a 2 at the end of it.
that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. So then I was like, wait, hang on a minute. If it's a Klonoa 2, there's gotta be a Klonoa 1. And it turns out there's actually way more than that. There's a bunch on the Game Boy Advance as well, which are fantastic. But yeah, Klonoa 2 is my Klonoa.
Ah, like what did you think of Klonoa 1?
I think it's really, really good. I like the art style hasn't aged particularly well. The gameplay is very, very similar in that it's sort of 2.5D, 3D environments, but like 2D gameplay. But they have some kind of messy looking sprites in the PS1 version. Just like visually, it's not aged particularly gracefully. And also in terms of the story, I feel like the melodrama in Klonoa 2 doesn't land quite as well as it does in Klonoa 2. Like, yeah, in Daughter Phantom Isle, it feels a bit just like it comes out of nowhere. Sometimes it works really, really well, but in Klonoa 2, I felt like it was a bit more consistent. Though I did cry playing Klonoa 1, so I don't know why it's kind of a dull criticism.
Like what led you in the game to have that moment, to have that little emotional moment?
I guess it was just that, like, the game, Klonoa games have a tendency to be very, very bright and very, very happy. You're literally playing through dreams. And it's, it's all blue skies and bright green grass and fluffy clouds and all that stuff. And even the bosses are fun, the enemies are fun. But despite that, Klonoa as a series doesn't ever pull punches. And when it finds a point where like a character needs to go away or a character needs to die or something bad needs to happen, it fully commits to that. And it can be really, really distressing because Klonoa, the protagonist of the game, is kind of this strange boy cat creature with giant ears that he can use as wings. It's really odd. But as a result, when something bad happens, like, and Klonoa's really beat up about it, like, he cries. And it's really, really sad. It's really distressing. It sounds like a child or an animal whining or something. Like, it's really, like, genuinely distressing. So, yeah, Klonoa 1 has a few moments like that, and I guess one of the reasons why I like that stuff is because it always feels earned. It's not just melodrama. It doesn't feel like melodrama for the sake of it. It feels like very earnest when it has those kind of like sad bits or those like kind of sappy bits. It feels like the game got there in a way that felt justified. And I really like that about the series in general.
Yeah, I stopped you off earlier, but yeah, give the elevator pitch on what was Klonoa 2.
So, Klonoa 2, firstly, it's really good.
We gathered as much, otherwise you wouldn't be here talking about it.
Right? But I feel like it should just be stressed. It's a 2.5D platformery thing. I guess a puzzle platformer. It's not like a Twitch platformer. It's very much just like it's got a reasonably steady pace to it. Where you would play as Klonoa, who is a cat creature thing with giant ears. When you jump, you can do like a little like Yoshi style like mid-air wobble by flapping Klonoa's ears. And the key mechanic of Klonoa basically revolves around this ring that Klonoa has, which you can kind of... I'm not sure what verb to use. You can kind of fire it a very short distance, and if you fire it at an enemy, the enemy then becomes attached to your ring. So you can then throw the enemy, or you can jump and then jump again while you're holding the enemy and throw the enemy downwards and use it like a double jump. But different enemies have different attributes, which leads to different mechanics, which leads to puzzles with different solutions. And and that's sort of where the puzzle elements come from. Is this whole like grabbing enemies and throwing them in different directions mechanic.
Mm.
It's in terms of gameplay, it's a pretty basic puzzle platformer. I think the gameplay is very good. The level design in the Klonoa games is very, very strong throughout. But I would say that the real appeal of Klonoa and the reason it resonates so much with me is because tonally and like artistically and just in terms of like the audio, like everything about the presentation feels like the best dream you've ever had. Like it's so upbeat and joyous, and when it isn't, it's deliberate and it still feels nuanced and interesting. And for a game that's so basic, where you play as a weird cat thing, it's astonishing to me that the tone is always so interesting and like just nuanced, and it creates a world that you always want to be a part of. And it really elevates the game above most platformers, just because it is so well presented and it feels just so nice to be in that space.
When playing it at the time, like when did you first play Klonoa 2, by the way?
So I think I would have been 7 or 8, but I didn't own the game until I was about 10 or 11, I think.
Ah, okay. Like for that time, like how did you find that kind of tone? Like looking back on it.
So at the time, I just remember it being really, really happy, and I mean, like as I said, I kind of missed out on that PS1 era of like super bright, happy, colorful platformers. And I feel like if I'd been aware of the lineage of platforms that came before Klonoa, it might not have hit me quite as hard, just like how unbelievably upbeat and joyous the game was. But for me, as my first platformer, it felt perfect, and I still think, looking at it, it feels like the culmination of every kind of where platforms had been up until that point, reaching their perfect like tonal conclusion. Where everything's really cohesive and there's not that one weird area, that one weird level that feels thematically wrong with the rest of the game. It all fits together, but still is varied and interesting and bright and colorful and just just like vivid and happy, I guess.
Like talk of that varied level design and just talk about the various level design in that game, because like you say, it does seem, different each level you play.
So the level design's interesting in that the game's it does a lot of things at once. It plays with the fact that in terms of how you're controlling Klonoa, you're on a 2D plane, but it has, because the levels are still in 3D, you're just on this sort of like winding pathway through it. You can then use the perspective in interesting ways. So if Klonoa's on a strip of level closer to the camera, but then there's something way in the background, you can throw enemies at that thing in the background and it will work, and they use it as a puzzle mechanic very frequently. So even though it controls 2D, it's fundamentally a very 3D focused game, and I would say it actually uses depth in 3D a lot more interestingly than most 3D games do. For example, if you have a boss fight, it's not just going to be a boss fight where you run on a 2D. Well, there's only one boss fight where it feels like it could have worked in 2D. Most of the boss fights, you're on a ring around the boss, and you kind of run around the boss, and the camera circles around the boss with you. And you basically have to use this 2D plane to find different angles on the boss, and then pick up enemies and throw them at the boss. And it just uses perspective in a really interesting way like that, and most of the puzzles involve that in some way. If they don't use that perspective, they use the enemy's attributes. For example, there's an enemy where the default enemy, if you pick them up with the ring and then you throw them, they will fly through the air and they will hit a wall or something or another enemy, and then the enemy will sort of like poof and explode, but not damage anything around it. It will just disappear. But as you get further on into the game, there are these similar looking enemies who explode on a timer, and they don't pop when they collide with things. They only like die and explode once they've got to the end of this timer, which means that suddenly you can like throw them around into different positions and like trigger bombs to open up doorways. And then when you bring that in with the perspective mechanic, maybe there's a door in the distance that you can see from where you're at that you have to throw this bomb enemy at. Then you have to find a way over to that place in the distance on this 2D plane. Like it's kind of difficult to describe, but it's one of those things where in the game it absolutely makes sense just spatially how these things work. And then once you get further on into the game, those different enemy types suddenly combine in way more interesting ways, and suddenly you have to go like, okay, I need to grab this enemy here and then move him over here and then throw it down at this enemy and then do a double jump up here, and that will allow me to go here. And you kind of, it's very methodical. You really have to look at a problem and take a step back from it and look at it as a whole and then work back from the solution.
Like it's a proper thinking type of solution for a platform game, anyways.
Yeah, and it varies from just being like kind of being very light puzzles just to make navigation a bit more interesting to being really quite challenging puzzle rooms. And it flows very naturally between them, and it's paced very well to mean that you're constantly moving forward and no puzzle really stumps you for more than like 2 or 3 minutes, but it still feels very satisfying when you get through it.
Like for its time, for its release, like I mean, certainly for its period, like what was the standard Klonoa was up against, like at that time, Klonoa 2? I mean, because like obviously there was. I'm obviously talking about a full 3D platformer here compared to kind of 2.5D stuff that Klonoa was talking about. But the stuff I'm thinking about here in this regard was Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and like maybe those aren't perhaps fair comparisons, because like I said, those are two relatively 3D titles, and there was also Rayman at the time, again another 3D platformer. So again, not most likely the right comparisons, but like the standard of what was the standard of platformer games at that time, like up against that, or the standard platformer games that Klonoa 2 was up against at that time?
Honestly, I think the examples that you've said are pretty on point. I mean, like Klonoa 2 was I guess for the time it just felt more like it did want to let go of its 2D origins, whereas for me, as someone who'd only ever grown up with 3D games, Klonoa 2 felt like a throwback. Which is interesting. It's interesting to me that like for people who grew up with 2D games, it would have just seemed maybe a little bit dated. But for me, it just seemed like it was exploring the heritage of 2D games, which I hadn't really got to experience very well up until that point. But no, like I mean, when I was playing Klonoa 2 through, like all the way through when I finally owned it, I was playing Jak 2 around the same time, and even then, even when I was quite young, like I still sort of noticed the correlation. Was like, okay, these are both platformers, but they're fundamentally doing very, very different things. And honestly, I think it's kind of, I would say that Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank stuff, those were the stands that sort of Klonoa 2 would have been up against in terms of just like the platformer genre. But I also think that, especially during the PS2 era, people had kind of perfected the 3D platformer controls, but people hadn't really nailed down the structure of 3D platformers for that generation yet. So I feel like the platformer genre on the PS2 was diverse enough anyway that it didn't really make me ever feel like, oh, Klonoa was better or worse than X. And I this might just be biased, but like I feel like most people probably wouldn't have. I feel like most people probably would have done the same and would have just been like, well, it's just different. And I have since looked up like review scores of Klonoa 2 when it came out, and it was generally received very, very well.
But the sales weren't exactly the best.
No, which is a shame, because I want them to release it in HD.
Well,
or let me make a third one.
Like, do you ever foresee Namco giving you the license for it? The
well,
license?
I keep asking, but I don't think they're going to bite. Which is a shame, because I would make it for nothing. I just want that to be another Klonoa game. I actually have... This is embarrassing. I have like a pitch document, like a very rough pitch document for what my Klonoa 3 would be, just on the off chance that at some point someone from Bandai Is it Namco Bandai?
It's Bandai Namco now.
Okay, because I swear it was the other way around for a bit.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
They keep changing their names so often, you can't really keep up anymore.
Point is, I'm hoping that if I keep going on about Klonoa 2 enough, someone from Bandai Namco will eventually be like, do you want to make this? And I could be like, yes, finally. Because I feel like, at least based off 10, and obviously we'll go into this a bit later, but like based off 10 Second Ninja and Castle in the Sky, like, I sort of accidentally taught myself how to make a game that's sort of tonally and like kinesthetically similar to Klonoa, and I feel like I could probably do an okay job of it, and I would really I'd love to make a Klonoa game. But anyway, I probably won't. So
every Klonoa fan heartbroken at that revelation.
yeah.
Did you play the remake of 1 on the Wii? 'Cause like you said earlier, like you were a very big Nintendo fanboy at that time and were very heavy for the Wii. Like was that something you wanted to play at that time, or have played now?
I haven't, like, basically around, because as I said, like it didn't occur to me that there was a first one until a couple of years ago, by which point I was way over the Wii. Which is why I played the original PS1 one, because I had a PSP that was definitely not broken open and had loads of emulators on it. And I had like Klonoa 1, right? And like because I bought the PS1 disc, like, and then realized that I didn't want to sit and plug in my PS2 and go through it, so I just emulated the damn thing. Realized how bad it looked in HD. And then just played it on a PSP instead. But yeah, so I kind of missed the Wii re-release entirely. It's something that I'd still like to go back to, but it's like, I don't know, I feel like I've gotten to the stage with the Wii now where it's like I just can't really be bothered to plug it in. You know? Like, just getting all the wires ready and stuff, it's just, like, if it's not plugged into one of my HDMI ports already, I'm not having it.
Like, do you not have a Wii U?
I don't, not yet. It's on my list.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure why this is either, because I keep... So my stance on the Wii U is like, it looks pretty good, I just need... And I've been saying this for about 2 years, it's like, I just need one more game that makes me really want it, and then I'll get a Wii U. And I keep seeing really good games that I would like to play, but not quite enough to justify the purchase.
Oh,
so I still have it.
There's so many games that justify it now. So many.
I know. People keep telling me this.
Like the Splatoon, Bayonetta 2, Mario Kart 8, like, so many.
You're going to hate me for this. I didn't like Bayonetta 1. I didn't get on with it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of my favourite game. Next week... and just literally as we're recording this... Bayonetta 2 is 15 quid on Amazon as we're recording this. So, like, buy Wii U and then buy Bayonetta 2 on Amazon. Like, no.
I need to get an Xbox One first. Yeah, that's this Christmas. I'm a big Halo fanboy, right? And I still... I know maybe at some point when I was a big Nintendo fanboy, I got really burnt out on Nintendo. But right now I really, like... I don't know. I really want to play my 3DS more than I do, but like I just can't find a place in my life where it fits in. Like I tend to hear that people, like, the place that a 3DS occupies in people's lives is the same place that like a book could occupy, but I don't read books, so I just wouldn't play it. Or like I don't play the one that I have, and I'm sort of worried that with the Wii U it'd be similar, where like I probably wouldn't play party games on it, 'cause if I play party games on the Wii U, it's usually at like loading in London or something. So like I know, like I just don't. There's not a gap that it would fill in my life currently, which is a shame, because like I absolutely agree that a lot of the library on the Wii U is extremely strong, and it would allow me to play Klonoa Door to Phantom.
It would. There's your game. There's the game. Go for it.
There's the game. I could just buy a Wii on eBay for like 30 quid and just sit it at my desk and play it then.
Well, you could, but then if you buy a Wii U, you can play Klonoa 1 on it. Plus, you have Splatoon Mario Kart 8 and Bayonetta 2. You will play Bayonetta 2 if it's the last thing you will ever do.
All three of those games are games that I'm like, oh yeah, they sound kind of like they sound pretty interesting, but like none of them, none of them get my heart racing.
Well, you may as well go for it. Two birds, one stone. Um, but we digress.
Yeah.
Like story-wise, how did you find that at the time, like playing it?
So this is
Compared
one.
to, yeah, compared to now even as well.
So this is one of the reasons why Klonoa 2 means so much to me. I mean, it always meant quite a lot to me as a kid. Um, but it's one of the few games I've played where I've gone back and it's meant completely different things to me as an adult. Um, so when I was a kid, I just appreciated that the story basically plays out a bit like a cartoon, where it's sort of episodic. The premise of the game is, you are Klonoa, who is a dream traveler. He appears mysteriously on the shore of a beach during a storm. It's found by these two characters, Lola and Popka, and he proceeds to go on an adventure with them, ringing bells in all four kingdoms in this fictional game world. Lola is a priestess. It's her job to basically ring these bells and get these like orb things to keep them safe. Unfortunately, there's a character called Leorina, who is I think that's how you pronounce her name, who is a sky pirate. She is also trying to ring the bells, but for nefarious means. And like it's a pretty stupid like Team Rocket style like nemesis, right? Where it's just like, we go to this city. Oh no, the evil people are here. Let's stop them. And like it feels quite formulaic, right? But it has a earnestness to it that I really enjoyed as a kid. Like each of the kingdoms you go to are themed. So like you've got the Kingdom of Joy, which is called, I think it's called like Joyland or something, which is like a kingdom that is literally just a giant theme park. And then you go to another one which is called like Vor, I think, which is like a city where like everyone's just fighting. It's just war. Then you've got another one which is like the Kingdom of Mystery, and like each of them are themed, and it feels formulaic, but then the game starts doing things that sneak up on you, and you realize that the characters actually have, I wouldn't say depth, but they have a sincerity to them that means that you really start believing their friendship. And I really appreciated that as a kid. Like, I really started to like these characters. And I'm sort of starting to lead into like spoiler territory here, but it's a very old game. If you really care about the story of Klonoa 2, then you should have played it by now. You're about 15 years too late. Oh my god, I'm so old. Anyway, so
Nice to drop that in.
yeah. So basically, once you the idea is there are four of these kingdoms. You go to ring the bell on each one, but what ends up happening is the evil person rings like all the bells before you and gets all of these orb things. And basically, that's the point where you're like, wait, so everything's ruined, like everything should be ruined. And what this basically does is open up a fifth kingdom. So all of these kingdoms, as I said, have been themed. So it's like joy, war, I think there's tranquility, and then there's mystery as well. And then by this like sky pirate person doing this, she opens up a fifth kingdom, which is the Kingdom of Sorrow. And that's where the game gets really, really cool. Because firstly, you have like an all is lost moment where you're like, well, how do we fix this? Because the world suddenly gets like way drearier. Like the sea just runs dry, and it reveals this hidden kingdom that was under the sea, where it's just sad all the time, and there's just one person there, the King of Sorrow, and like it starts getting really, really bleak. And pretty much immediately after Leorina does this, she realizes what she's done, and she feels horrible about it. So now you've got a situation where the three main characters you really like, who you've super liked throughout the whole game, aren't the only characters you like. You're now really, really sympathetic towards the villain, who feels awful about what she's done and wants to stop it as well. And what this leads up to is you going to the Kingdom of Sorrow to confront the King of Sorrow, who's just a really sad creature. He looks a lot like you, like Klonoa, the player character, but he's just unbelievably sad. And of course, like, you explore the Kingdom of Sorrow, which has a really cool soundtrack where it's like an amalgamation of all of the game's soundtrack before that, but like distorted and fading in out of beat, and like everything just feels a bit uncomfortable. And of course, you have the boss fight and stuff. You defeat the King of Sorrow, but the sort of like revelation you have, I don't even want to call it a twist because the game doesn't really treat it like a twist. But you discover that, like, right at the start of the game, there's this voice that keeps calling out to you saying, "Help me, help me." And at the end of the game, you discover that it was the King of Sorrow all along, and the reason the King of Sorrow has been so sad is because the Fifth Kingdom, the Kingdom of Sorrow, has been separated from joy, tranquility, mystery, and conflict, essentially. Like, because this kingdom has been separated from all of these elements, it's just constantly sad because there's no humanity there, right? So, like, a lot of this didn't sink in when I was a kid. I was just like, oh, right. So even the king, the big bad, like, I'm super sympathetic towards now. And then there's like a sad ending where Klonoa has to say goodbye, and I cried like a baby, because I really like these characters and I wanted them to stay together forever. But the reason it means so much to me now, and the reason I feel like Klonoa 2 has so much staying power with me is, obviously as an 8-year-old kid, I was just like, this is a really nice story, and it ended in a sad but fulfilling way. And as an adult going back and playing it, it's like, oh my god, all of this time, this game has been basically telling a big metaphorical tale about depression. And like, how separate, like, the villain is literally spending the whole game crying out to you for help because he's lonely and has been separated from everything that kind of makes life meaningful. And like, that hit me like a bus. Like, that was huge because I hadn't even thought about it. Like, that was, sort of like an 8-year time span where I hadn't played the game. So going back and playing it, and then suddenly realizing that there was this incredibly meaningful subtext there, in a game that is so outwardly silly and optimistic and upbeat, it really just hit me. It really, really meant a lot to me, and it came at a time just after I'd finished sort of secondary school, and I won't go into it too much, but like, I've had quite a few friends in the past who've been very depressed and stuff like that. So playing it again with, I'd say the big difference between playing it as a kid and playing it now is like, I wouldn't have noticed that subtext as a kid because I wasn't aware that it was like depression and that stuff was a thing. And also like I had such an optimistic view of the world at that point that I just wouldn't have noticed anyway, right? But yeah, going back and playing it and realizing that this thing that was incredibly nostalgic to me and something that meant a lot to me anyway had this extra layer of incredibly deep and, at least to me, powerful meaning to it, massively elevated the game to a point where it stopped just being like a novelty. It stopped being a really nice nostalgic thing that reminded me of being a kid. It still is that to me, but now on top of that, it's an incredibly meaningful story about depression that I never even had known was there. And that I feel like that's incredibly special.
It's years down the line, like, that makes a game, like, I'm rambling when I say that, but I was saying this in one of the episodes I was recording the day before recording this one. Like, and this doesn't have an emotional foreshadowing to, or an emotional aspect to what I'm saying, but like, I'll repeat this story anyways. And considering this is going to be earlier in the season, you'll hear this story again. But when I played Metal Gear Solid 2, this isn't really a very emotional attachment to it, but I'll go for it anyways. Metal Gear Solid 2. Do you remember so do you remember coming up to the helipad first time while you're defusing the bombs? So, so it's Big Cell riding, and you get the cutscene with Olga, and she's talking to someone. There's references for Tengu soldiers. You don't really know who the other man is on the other side of the radio. She does this kind of ninja moves, disappearing, and there's the same music that plays at when you fight Snake, or when you fight her on the Tangerous Snake. Like, years down the line, I didn't realize that that was foreshadowing events. Like, the Tengu soldiers she was referring to was the soldiers guard Arsenal gear. The other guy on the other end of the radio was Solidus, and the move she was doing and the music would have foreshadowed her as the ninja. Spoilers, by the way. I realize what I'm saying doesn't have any emotional attachment compared to what you've said and what you discovered about Klonoa. But my point is, it's even if the discovery is a minor one or a major one, as in your case with Klonoa too, it's really, I'm trying to find the right word, but for the lack of a better term, it's really fulfilling. That's the word. It's really fulfilling to kind of find out these things about games later on in life, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think about it a lot as a designer, and I'm like, I still haven't quite figured out how you plan that stuff. Like, because I feel like the reason that Klonoa 2 means so much to me is largely in part to the fact that I did experience it as a kid and then again as an adult, and I don't feel like the designers could have accounted for that when designing the game. Or if they did, they were targeting a very, very specific niche. But, I think Metal Gear Solid as a series is incredibly good for that stuff, where it's like, I'm not sure how to describe it. I guess I'm a big fan of games that feel like you can, if you put enough thought into it and you draw enough of those kind of lines together, you can uncover a new level of depth and a new level of thought that was put into the creation of that thing. And I feel like one of the reasons that it tends to mean so much is because it feels like it's personal, right? Like, because it feels like you could have, because it is so specific or it is so related to your past experience, you're very aware that very few other people could have probably experienced this the same way. And that suddenly, it suddenly makes the game feel like it's aware of you in a strange way, or like it cares about you specifically and how you specifically are experiencing this thing. And again, obviously it kind of can't, because I'm not sure how designers would account for that. But I love it when it happens. I love it when there's that kind of that foreshadowing. And again, like Metal Gear Solid, one of the advantages of it being such a long-running series with so many like repeated elements and repeated themes and repeated iconography is that by the time you get to something like Metal Gear Solid 5, you're playing through it and you're going like, oh, so that's like this. And like even if you're just playing Metal Gear Solid 5 and you start noticing like all the V's popping up everywhere, and suddenly you're like, oh, okay, that's just like a really cool aesthetic thing. Because most people aren't even going to be looking for those kind of repeated symbols. But it's like, once you notice it's there, it suddenly adds more meaning to it, and it's like a reward, I guess. And yeah, as you said, like, it's fulfilling. Like, it's having a nice little reward for going like, okay, because you put the trust in us to have thought about the game in this much depth when we were making it, here is something back. Here is something that only you could have found through thinking hard about this thing that we made. And I love that stuff.
And like I said, it's just absolutely incredible to find those things in games. And like years down the line, it's just great. It's just wonderful, really. No matter how much the punch of that moment is, whether it be minor, whether it be significant, like it's great. It's really great. It's more or less one of the reasons why I love games. Like, just finding those things like down the line. It's just great, really great. But we digress. Like, touch upon some of the characters that you were really fond of in that game, because like obviously there was Klonoa, but like and you mentioned some of them in brief, what was the kind of attachment you had to the set of characters that were in the game?
So it's strange because the characters are very kind of archetypical. Um, you know, they're a little bit tropey and they aren't given enough time to be like fully fleshed out three-dimensional characters. But the game's so earnest. Like the main trio is Klonoa, who's like the dream traveler. He's not a mute protagonist. He doesn't talk a lot. Um, you've got Lola, who's sort of like your main like partner in crime throughout the game. She goes on your adventure with you. She's the main speaking person. She's the person who explains any exposition in the world. Um, she is sort of one of the key anchors that the whole plot revolves around in terms of her role as a priestess and what that means to the actions that you have to complete throughout the world. And then you've got Popka, who's like kind of the comic relief character. He's this weird rabbit thing with like jewels for eyes. He's very sarcastic and just strange. Um, but it's one of those things where like it felt as if whoever was writing the game was starting with these archetypes because they didn't want to write anything that complicated or that deep. And then it almost feels like whoever was writing it found that the story snuck up on them as they were writing it, and then they got really into it. And I love that. Like, I love that it feels like someone genuinely got to a point about two-thirds of the way through the game. Like, there's this cutscene where Lola's basically like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I'm strong enough to complete the tasks that we have ahead of us. And this happens like during a boss fight. And Popka's like, well, look at Klonoa. Like, he doesn't really understand what's happening, and he's still trying really hard. And like, it's done in a way that is so earnest, and I feel like the soundtrack helps us a lot. That these things that feel like they're just kind of generic, like adventure game nonsense, really hits a lot harder and really feels meaningful. It means that once you get to this revelation where like the fifth kingdom is unlocked, and you realize that like the game's not going to wrap up how you thought it was going to wrap up. It's going to go somewhere really, really weird with it. That's suddenly where everything ties together, and it goes from being a kind of generic but pretty charming game into something where you don't know where it's going to go, but you care about everyone who's involved. And that's huge. Like just the fact that Leorina the Sky Pilot starts off as this like generic, nefarious, like ha villain, and then she turns into someone genuinely sympathetic who like ends up breaking down, crying by the end. Like it's interesting. I'd almost compare it to. Have you ever seen the amazing TV show Avatar: The Last Airbender?
No, I have not, but I well, obviously know of it, but I've not seen it. No.
Okay, you absolutely should see it. Because that's also it sort of reminds me of that, and I obviously I won't spoil Avatar: The Last Airbender because that is a show that should never be spoiled. But it sort of has a similar thing where it starts off in kind of a generic, like, oh, okay, I understand this place, where it's very well done, but it's still something that you've sort of seen before. And then as it goes on, turns into something incredibly sincere and much more nuanced and much more complicated. Um, and it's just one of those stories that kind of sneaks up on you and ends up being really, really great and really, really meaningful. I'm not even sure the characters are so much a part of that, so much as just the consistent presentation and tone, and the fact that the plot does kind of go in this weird direction towards the end. But yeah, like I feel kind of weird sort of saying like, well, like the characters are meaningful because it's not like you can say, oh well, this character's so complicated and interesting, because they're not. Like they're not complicated. They're not that interesting, but they're incredibly sincerely written, and in a way that's kind of charming in its naivety. Like the fact that it does, like, it's not like it just goes like, oh well, we need to have a bit where a character, talks about the merits of never giving up. It feels like whoever was writing it, I guess somewhat immaturely, was coming to this revelation on their own that you should never give up. And like they just put that on the in the game. And I love that. Like everything about it feels like it's like one thing leads to another perfectly, and even though it's basic and kiddie and like kind of Saturday morning TV show esque, like the game means it. And I don't think that's any small thing.
When you say that, that never give up mantra, it basically seems like whoever wrote it just basically let off the mantra. John C. What else did you like about Contra? Contra? I don't know what I'm talking about. What else did you like about
Very
Klonoa?
different games.
Yes, very different games, because we're talking about a Namco game, not a Konami game. I don't know where I got Contra from. I just had a brain fart. What else did you like about Klonoa?
Whatever becomes a slot machine.
A pachinko machine. It's going to happen.
So I guess... So, like, I replayed it before coming on to record this. I've been sort of playing it throughout the afternoon just to refresh myself on why I like the game, and make sure that I wasn't just remembering it more fondly than it deserved. Luckily, I'm not. It's a bloody good game. But, I guess one of the things that I really like about it, that I'm not entirely proud of, but also sort of don't mind, is that there was definitely a shift between Klonoa 1 and Klonoa 2, where Klonoa 1 you're playing as like Klonoa, he's this weird cat thing, he's a small little dinky cat thing, and he's got a hat. And then Klonoa 2, it's almost like they kind of wanted to make it like Klonoa 1 with attitude, but then they didn't follow through on it, so it's still this really cutesy game, but like now Klonoa wears his hat backwards, and he like surfboards, and like it's really weird because it doesn't come across as them being. It doesn't come across as like Poochie and The Simpsons or something. Like it just comes across as them being like, yeah, okay. Like every other platformer hero is getting weirdly darker for their sequel, so like let's do it.
Well, they more or less did this with the Wii version a few years ago, in that they were trying to like redo Klonoa's design. It was basically a Poochie design, so to speak.
Yeah, and it doesn't really work in Klonoa 1. In Klonoa 2, it just about works. Mainly because it feels like, I guess it sort of resonates with me because when I was a kid, I really didn't want to grow up, and like most kids are like, oh, I can't wait till I'm a teenager, and the teenagers are like, oh, I can't wait till I'm an adult. I was always wanting to be a kid. I still want to be a kid. I hate the fact that I'm like 6 foot whatever. And basically like the way Klonoa handles that whole like attitude thing sort of feels like that. Not Klonoa the character, just like Klonoa 2 the game, where like they give him a snowboard, they give him a surfboard, they pull his hat backwards, but he's still acting exactly the same. And I really like that because, like, as a 10-year-old, I still thought surfboards were really cool. So I could still play this and still like was this really upbeat, just like wee, let's go around and have an adventure kind of thing. And then also have these really cool like surfboarding segments, which actually control really well, considering it's a like standard platformer. It has these sort of like surfboarding bits that basically work pretty much exactly the same way, except occasionally the camera will flip behind Klonoa, like when you're like a 3D Sonic game, you know, when you're running and the camera's behind him and you're just blasting through stuff. But then it will also switch back into a side-on perspective. So it's one of those things where it's like clearly at some point someone was like, well, we need to put like surfboarding or like extreme sports in the game, even though it won't really work. And they do it, and then just do it in the most like endearing, charming, childlike Klonoa way possible, where he's just like so happy that he's on a surfboard, and like he can like jump and do spins, and that's something as well that I love about Klonoa. Klonoa has a dedicated pose button. Actually, no, that's not true. It has two. So if you press L1 or L2, he'll do a pose and say something in Japanese. But this works like in different contexts. Like if you're standing, occasionally he'll pull like the pose that's on the front of the box if you press it, or he'll like throw his ring in the air and then catch it. But if you're doing one of the like surfboarding / snowboarding bits, like if you're jumping in the air, he'll do like a spin, and then it's like Tony Hawk's because you're doing all these tricks. Like there's no points for it. It's like completely like it doesn't matter to the game at all, but you can do it and it feels cool. It's purely just to show off. And likewise, if you're like being shot through the air in a cannon, you've got different like pull a pose buttons for that. And like they don't benefit the game at all, and they don't do anything. But like, it's just so nice that they're there, and I love that about it. Like, it's just like let's put this in there because it's cool. I love that. Just that it has this really like naive, like kid looking at his older brother, like perception of what cool is. And I adore that. I absolutely adore that.
This is going to be a bit of a tricky question to answer, but like, what didn't you like?
Okay, so I was thinking about this as well when I was playing it. The main thing, like, because I was thinking it from the perspective of what would I change? Um, like if I was to go in and like redesign this, what would I change? The collision's a bit weird. It definitely feels like they cut corners, and sometimes some of your attacks should hit and they don't hit, and sometimes you fall off a ledge when you shouldn't, and just like loads of little things like that. Where you're like, yeah, the controls could be a little bit tighter. Like the jumping and stuff feels great, but there's definitely bits here and there where it's like, this doesn't quite work. Um, the other thing is it, especially sort of towards the mid game, some of the pacing is a little bit wonky. There's like one or two levels where it's like, okay, you should have trimmed like two or three rooms out of this, but it's all like nitpicky stuff. I mean, it's the game's so weird, like just in terms of the way it plays and the way it looks and the tone of it, that it's not like you can look at it and go like, oh, well, this character should be more fleshed out. Because you're like, well, in the context of the game that this is, it works. Like everything in it feels like it's there to serve whatever weird conclusion this game's design was supposed to come to. So it's sort of difficult to look at it in quotations like objectively and look at like what would be nice to add in and what would be nice to take out, because it's like everything here feels like it's there to create what the game is, and it feels like the game's exactly what it wanted to be. I would say like, yeah, the only stumbling blocks there are pacing's a bit off and the collision on the platforming isn't always great. But like that's it. Um, which is like, yeah, like it's like I don't know, maybe I'm sort of looking at it through rose tinted glasses a bit because like I do just adore the game, and like I like genuinely wouldn't want to change it for the world, I don't think. Um, but yeah, there aren't that many problems with it. Also, by the way, just one thing that I remembered that I feel like should get a mention. Um, the game has like a music player mode, and this game has the best soundtrack ever. Like legitimately one of my favorite game soundtracks of all time. And if you basically 100% the game, you unlock a music box that plays every single song from the entire game. And I just forgot about that until just now, and it's like one of my favorite things because I remember being like 10 and thinking and like pausing and just like sitting on the menu screen and just because I loved the way that it sounded, and then having that be like my final unlock was like the most incredible, wonderful thing ever. Because then I just sat there all day and just had it on in the background, just playing music from the game. Like, if nothing else, seek out the soundtrack on YouTube or something, because it really is an astonishingly good soundtrack.
There's only been two mainline games, so I don't need to ask you for a top three, but unless you want to put in one of the GBA games.
See, I feel like that would probably be... Seeing as I can't remember the name of the Game Boy Advance games, because there was two, I don't want to say which one... I don't want to be like, which one is my third, because obviously it's like Klonoa 2, then Daughter Phantomar, and then one of the Game Boy Advance ones. But both of the Game Boy Advance ones that I played were incredibly good. So I would just say like they weren't anywhere like they weren't up to Klonoa 2 standards. They weren't as story focused, or at least the presentation of the story was very very different. And I think the game kind of suffers for that because Klonoa 2 is basically just a very very strong platformer with incredible presentation and incredibly large amounts of charm. And some of that gets sacrificed in the Game Boy Advance version and just turns it into a very good puzzle platformer. Um, so yeah, I mean, in terms of ranking, it's Klonoa 2, Klonoa, Daughter Phantom and PS1, and then just if you find a Game Boy Advance one, play it because it's still a great game.
Compared to the platformers that have been released since Klonoa 2's release, like obviously there's been platformer stuff come out since Klonoa 2 in the decade came out, but I want to talk about more of the platformers of today, like because there's a lot has happened in the platform genre since Klonoa 2 came out. There's been Super Mario Galaxy, Rayman Legends and Origins, and like can a game like Klonoa 2 still hold up today compared to beasts like Super Mario Galaxy and the most recent Rayman games, especially with Mario Galaxy being one of the best games of all time, arguably.
I think so. So the reason that I feel like Klonoa 2 still holds up, and I would say this for any game that still holds up today, um, Klonoa 2 is like perfectly, or pretty much perfectly achieves the goals that it sets out to achieve. Um, it's sort of everything that it's doing design-wise serves its own internal goals, and that means that even if the industry changes, even if we get new industry trends or whatever, it doesn't matter because Klonoa is trying to do something that works as like a standalone, I guess. It's internally consistent, and that makes it difficult for outside industry trends to really sort of hurt that. I mean, a lot of this as well is just because it's a platformer. Platformers had existed for 20 years before Klonoa 2 came out. So as a result, like it's like it wasn't the way that platformers controlled and the way that they were paced and a lot of the mechanics had kind of plateaued. Like I'd say, actually, I should have probably mentioned this with the Klonoa 2 flaws, but like it still has like a live system. That's the only like dated relic that I feel like doesn't serve the game. But everything else isn't out to serve making a good platformer. It's out to serve Klonoa 2. So it still holds up incredibly well, more so than I think maybe like as incredible as Mario Galaxy is, like maybe more than Mario Galaxy will do in 10 to 20 years time, because Mario Galaxy's goal is like its goal is to create something that is simultaneously its own thing and a successor to Mario 64, and there's going to be something that comes after Super Mario Galaxy or Galaxy 2 or 3D World, whatever, that is Galaxy is then going to be compared to, right? So it's playing by different rules. It's trying to shoot for different goals, and I feel like because it's shooting for goals that are set by conditions that exist outside of the game. In Mario Galaxy's case, it is just like other games in the Mario series. Yeah, I feel like that means that it can be dated a bit easier. Whereas with Klonoa, it very much feels like it knows exactly what it's trying to do, it knows exactly how to do it, and it doesn't feel like any lessons that have been learned since could change or improve that. Apart from the live thing, because it's redundant. So, yeah, like, I don't want to make it sound like I think Klonoa 2 is a perfect game, because I don't think any game is a perfect game. But I think Klonoa is exceptionally good at setting out. It's incredibly good at accomplishing what it wants to do. And yeah, what it's trying to do isn't dated. So I think it still holds up very, very well. I don't think sort of outside like other platformers have really changed that. Even from like the indie movement, I don't think there have been any platformers that have made me reassess Klonoa 2 and go like, you know what, this doesn't actually like work that well. Like it's still incredibly internally consistent.
Honorable mentions. Go for it.
Okay, so this is difficult actually. So I would say Gone Home. See, I've kind of a strange like sort of because I wouldn't even say that I have, and I'm aware this is kind of goes against the whole premise of this show, but like I wouldn't say that I have like a favorite game. I would say I'm quite lucky in that generally I don't have a favorite anything. Like I don't have a favorite friend, like I don't have a best friend. I have lots of people who I'm incredibly close with, and I count myself quite lucky for that. And in the same way with the media I consume, where it's like I'd have a good lot of games that I really really love, and Klonoa 2 is right up there. Um, but yeah, Gone Home is definitely very very high up there. Just in terms of the the revelation it gave me and the kind of in regards to the kind of stories that games could tell really really meant a lot to me. I mean, I've obviously been aware for quite a while, like, oh yeah, games can tell like passive stories, obviously, but I hadn't ever encountered something that felt that human and real and genuinely nostalgic. Um, Despite being a completely brand new game released in 2013, um, it really just felt like, okay, this has made me completely reassess how I think about games. And what actually ties into that quite nicely is um, one of my other favorite games is The Last of Us. The Last of Us I played before Gone Home, and even though I absolutely adored The Last of Us from start to finish, I think it's an incredible game. I think it's the culmination of everything that sort of AAA games have been trying to accomplish for all this time. I think it completely knocks it out of the park. The thing that makes me adore The Last of Us is the opening 10-15 minutes. And I distinctly remember playing those opening minutes of The Last of Us and thinking, this is what games need to be. Like, not obviously not every game, because games are more diverse than that, but it's like, this is the path that games should be pursuing, or there should be more people in games pursuing this kind of thing. Which is why then when a few months later I played Gone Home and realized that it was basically like the opening 10 minutes of The Last of Us, the video game. Um, like, I just fell in love with it. So I love both those games for that. Just like something about the fact that how both of those games accomplish the feeling of being in a house. It sounds like a really simple thing and a really strange thing to get really, really excited by, but suddenly it's like, oh my goodness. Like, you can make games that feel real. Not just in terms of like graphical fidelity, but just in terms of like just the ambience of a place. This feels like a house. Um, and both of those things really, really excite me, which is strange considering that they're both far and away very, very different from Klonoa 2. Um, and I'd say like sort of my other two honorable mentions. One of them is Zelda Twilight Princess, just because of the first Zelda I played. It was the game that really made me. That was the game where it drove me from sort of like toying with game designs in like notebooks and stuff to being like, this needs to be my job. I want to make one of these. Not like a Zelda specifically, but a game that makes someone else feel the way that game made me feel. Just that sense of scope and adventure and just craftsmanship is just astonishing. And I love it for it. I mean, if I'm honest, I felt a little bit burned after playing Twilight Princess, going back and playing some of the other Zeldas and being like, oh, okay, it wasn't this like massive, brand new, incredible thing, and it's actually been something that's been very slowly, steadily iterated on for 20 years. Um, but I imagine that the feeling I got from Twilight Princess is the feeling that I suppose people got when they played Ocarina of Time for the first time. Um, so I rate that game incredibly highly, even though I know a lot of people aren't that keen on Twilight Princess. And then also like, and this is less because I really like it that much as a game. I do really really like it as a game, but the reason this next one's so high up on my list is just because of how much it influenced me as a designer. Is Flower. That was the first game that taught me like, oh my god, you can make a game that doesn't have combat in it and have it be the best thing. Like, you can make a game that feels like lying in a field and that can still be engaging. And as a designer, it never occurred to me. And that changes everything. That changes the whole way you look at video games. And like I wouldn't expect Flower to be that for everyone. I know that a lot of people, for them, Journey was that, or maybe some other earlier kind of abstract indie game about like passive gameplay. But for me, that was Flower, and I think Flower did it incredibly well. And just I didn't even have to think about it critically for it to change my perception of design completely. And it's very rare that a game is so unbelievably innovative and fresh to me that happens. So I hold Flower in very, very high regard. Actually, the designer on it, Genova Chen, played a game I worked on, Castles in the Sky. He played that once, and he gave us a quote, and that's like still one of the highlights of my career. It's just because like that guy forever changed the way that I perceive games. I think those are sort of those are my top really. I hold the Metal Gear Solid series in very high regard, but I'm not sure if there's one Metal Gear Solid game that I'm like, this is the best one, because I like different parts.
Free.
I like 3 a lot, okay? I really do. I like it more for story and consistency and systems, but it didn't change the way I think about design. 2 was my first Metal Gear Solid, so that holds a special place in my heart. But I feel like 1 has the most moments where I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. My controller's vibrating on the floor and it's incredible. Like just those things that that directly addresses, like I think Metal Gear Solid 1 was sort of one of the few, was probably the first game I played that directly acknowledged that it was a game and was just cool with it. And like just from doing that and just being that kind of blasé about breaking the fourth wall, it therefore just couldn't help teaching me lots and lots about design. Just the fact that it was openly addressing it was enough to make it suddenly an incredibly valuable design lesson. Especially the Psycho Mantis boss fight, because, like, my god, that boss fight.
Top 3 ever, what would they be? Obviously Klonoa at the top.
So, yeah, I'd say Klonoa at the top, probably then followed by Gone Home, then followed by... I'm torn between Flower and The Last of Us. I go with The Last of Us because it's expensive, and it's the most expensive game on that list, and there should be a big budget one in there, just to give me hope about the games industry.
The inland taipan is the deadliest snake in the world. Its venom can kill a man in less than 45 minutes. Ninjas take less than 10 seconds.
Let's touch upon before we end this, like with your stuff, like starting with like, 'cause there's been a few. So like after that BAFTA success, there was 10-second Ninja, and like it's done well for itself, like easily done well for itself. Like as that became successful, like how did you find that kind of success?
So it was weird, right? Because 10-second Ninja kind of, I sort of feel like it took care of itself in a lot of ways. Like I don't want to make it sound like I didn't work very, very hard, because I did. To the point where like I've already burnt out around the game's launch, and I basically from, I think it was like mid-April 2014 to June or July, I basically just didn't do anything. I just sat at home and played games. I just couldn't deal with like the stress of it all. But thankfully, despite that, the game kind of just got its own following. It stayed. People talked about it on their own a lot longer than I thought it was. A lot longer than I thought they would. but as a result, it sort of feels like the most people were talking about it, and thankfully, I know they were talking about it quite positively. The most people were talking about it was in those like first 3 months, and for those 3 months, like I just didn't want to hear about it. Like I was just exhausted from working on it. So I kind of feel like I missed out on that a bit, and I'm very wary going forward with projects, like to make sure that I give myself a break before the next game launches, just because I don't want to get burnt out on that again, burnt out like that again, because I missed a bunch of stuff that I would have really liked to be present for, because things went quite well. But I found it. I've been really happy with the reaction to the game. It was sort of a strange experience for me, because 10-Second Ninja isn't, even though it's a puzzle platformer, and so is Klonoa 2, and I'm aware I've just gone on and on about how great Klonoa 2 is. 10-Second Ninja isn't the sort of game that I would typically play a lot of. Like, I'm not good at games. I'm not. Yeah, but it's as simple as that. Like, if a game's difficult, I really, really struggle with it. And a lot of 10-Second Ninja, when I started making it, was sort of a design experiment to be like, okay, can I make something from a more objective, obviously, like, in quotations, design perspective, and make a game that is more for an audience that I'm not a part of, and how would that go, and like how they like it, how would I playtest that? And 10-Second Ninja sort of became that, and as a result, I then became way more interested in that type of game, just because I'd been thinking about 10-Second Ninja a lot. But it did also mean that when the game came out, a lot of the reaction was quite surprising, because like the type of reaction that Let's Players had to it was different from what I was expecting, or speedrunners specifically. I was expecting people to do like big playthroughs of the whole game, and like try and figure out the best routes across this whole thing, because that's what speedrunners do, right? They go across the whole game and they do this thing. But speedrunners became instead really, really obsessed with individual levels, and would frequently play those over and over again. So that was a really interesting experience for me. The whole thing was really just eye-opening and very educational. This is definitely I've launched like 2 games, but like this is definitely, I'd say, the biggest launch that I'd ever done. And there was a lot to take in, but I'm incredibly happy with how people respond to the game. I'm very proud of how the game turned out. It's something that I would like to revisit. I would like to do more with it. We can't talk about specifics, but we recently announced ourselves as a proper company instead of it just being me, with Full Circle Interactive, and we are looking at sort of like trying to do different things with 10-Second Ninja, but we're not going to have news on that for a while. But it was an incredibly fulfilling experience. It's easily the hardest thing I've ever done. But yeah, the audience was great. The reaction to it was great. It's done well enough to keep us going like up until now, which I wasn't expecting a game like it to have that kind of tail on it. Yeah, it's been good. It's been really good. I sort of feel it's difficult to summarize, because it's sort of like it is just sort of has just been my life for like the last a year and a half, really.
Then to go from 10-Second Ninja to then do like castles in the sky with Jack, like that was, I don't quite know how to put this like in terms of a question, but it was certainly a change of tone, a shift of tone, anyways, from 10-Second Ninja to something like Castles in the Sky, because Castles in the Sky was more of a storybook.
Yeah, and that was a very sort of deliberate thing, right? Like, so Castle in the Sky we actually developed midway through 10-Second Ninja's production. I'd been doing 10-Second Ninja for like, I think, a year and a half. And I was getting really, really fatigued. And I was like, I need to do something completely different from this. Just because, like, no matter how much you love something, you stare at it for like 16 hours every single day, like eventually you're just going to need to look at something else. You're going to need to get in a different headspace. And Castles sort of was that for me. I was pretty much kind of like how I said earlier, like I've always wanted to be a kid and stay a kid. That's why I rate the first Kingdom Hearts higher than any of the sequels, just because like that is a game about being a kid, and very few things get the feeling of being a kid right. And I used to get really, really frustrated because I'd say to like my school friends and stuff, like, you know what, like I really miss being a kid, and they'd be like, yeah, you didn't have to do anything. And I was like, that isn't why being a kid was interesting to me. That wasn't why it was special. What was special to me about being a kid was everything being bigger than you and you not knowing how the world worked. So everything was awe-inspiring and amazing and surprising. And I feel like as an adult, you're never gonna get that frequency of day-to-day like revelation again. Like just when you're a kid, 'cause everything's new. And I wanted to make a game about that kind of that newness and that excitement and everything being big and you not knowing what to expect from it. And I realized that, you know, games as a medium is a perfect way to explore that, because you can create a world, you can create a place that the player doesn't understand and doesn't know what they need to expect from it. And Castles ended up becoming a game about that, where we're like, okay, how can we set up these kind of very serene, I guess almost set piece moments, but set piece makes it sound like Uncharted or something, where like you have these moments of surprise and revelation where you're like, oh, the game's doing that now. And it's not like, none of those revelations are scary. They're just tranquil, they're peaceful, they're nice, hopefully a little bit awe-inspiring. And Castles was just like a game about that. It was a game, so instead of having to talk to my friends and be like, here is why I liked being a kid, and then not getting it, I could just show them Castles in the Sky and go like, this was my childhood, this is how it felt. And thankfully, like, people got that. Like, I forget who wrote it, but there was a blog post from someone, like a complete stranger, who wrote about Castles in the Sky and said like what it meant to them, and it was like they had written down everything I'd been feeling for the prior 10 years, like or at least ever since I'd left primary school, right? And that's like, that wrecked me. Like it was a hugely emotional experience. Just working on something that sincere, and like, I'm not sure that kind of game is really sustainable for me. It's definitely like another. I want to go back and try and make a game like that again. I'm glad we got the success that we got from it. I wasn't expecting getting a BAFTA nomination for it, for sure. But it's not something that like, it's not something that I could do yearly, you know? I don't think I could make like another Castles just because like I want a project to do. It came from a place that was very honest, and the subject of Castles and just like that feeling of childhood had been something that had been on my mind pretty much every single day since I'd left primary school. Like, I can't do that on a whim. So yeah, it was a game that I felt like I needed. And just like as a developer, I like making things that I need, for whatever reason. Like Tenseiken Ninja, I needed to make that just because it was like, I need to know that I can make a game that is like a gamey game that people respond to in the way that I want. Like, I need to know that I can do that, because if I don't know that, then I'm going to be constantly worrying about it for like the rest of my life. And Castles in the Sky was sort of a similar need, but it was more like, I need to express this because I'm never going to have an opportunity to express this quite as well. So yeah, like it was weird to me because it didn't. When I was making it, it almost didn't feel like a tonal shift, because like Castles in the Sky and Tenseiken Ninja are just like different facets of me, right? Like, they're just different parts of my personality coming through in different ways that are like hopefully tonally consistent in their own individual rights. So to me, it just feels like different aspects of my personality, but I can completely understand why it would seem like a big tonal shift to someone who isn't me, because they just seem like two completely independent projects that don't really overlap at all. Right. If you are interested in even one word that I've said here, and your chances are you'll be interested in at least one of them, you should follow me on Twitter, because that's where, like, that's the mother base where all of my information comes from.
Christ, you have been playing a lot of MGS5.
You have no idea. 60 hours. So yeah, basically follow me at Game Design Dan, all one word. And also, if you're interested in what I'm doing with sort of 10-second Ninja stuff going forward, and some other projects as well that sort of aren't ready to announce yet, but will be in the near future, follow at 4CircleInt. That's the studio that's now sort of, we're handling 10-second Ninja stuff rather than it just being me. And also, if you're interested in more Castles in the Sky style stuff, follow at the Tall Trees. That's an underscore between each word, and you should be able to like keep up to date with everything that I'm doing development wise.
Thanks for listening to my favourite game. Next week, Harriet Jones on Fallout 3. Until next week, bye bye.